Hey, welcome to the Cam Otis Show. We're a father-son business podcast where we talk with other lifelong learners about making an impact and solving big problems. And today we're joined by another Army veteran, Jeff Eschliman. See, when you say it and you tell us how to say it, we overthink it every time. Jeff Eschliman. Hey, how you doing, man? It's good to see you.
I'm I'm doing phenomenal, and that was perfect. So we're all good.
But I was like, because I'm trying not to look at my notes, but maybe I don't know. But hey, man, it is great to see you and great to have you here and start to talk to you about uh, your business, why you're doing your business, and what in the heck you were thinking. And since I started off mentioning that you're an Army veteran, I want to touch on that. Tow gunner, crew member of a 113, 109. Look it up, kids. It's in the history books. Uh,
Right.
what did you learn as a young private tow gunner in Iraq, wearing MOP level 4, first Iraq? Uh, what did you learn there that you're still going back on and using now?
It's all of the fundamentals, Otis. It's the things that I learned really early in my life. Fortunately, I had a great father who instilled a lot of core values in me. But when I went in the service, I was really kind of a mama's boy before I went in the service. And when I went in there, you know, the old quintessential turns you into a man. But it's the fundamentals, the things that I was still using through my career was, the teamwork and the esprit de corps and even just the focus on fundamentals and the basics, like doing the fundamental things well. I was in the infantry, so it's shoot, move, communicate, right? If you do those three things and you keep advancing, that's the secret to success. So for me, those experiences were the fundamentals of leadership, like really seeing leadership play out, not only in garrison, like where it is fundamental, but on the battlefield, where I can't imagine a more iconic setting where leadership plays out. So, one of the things that I think made me a really good leader was being well led and then being a good follower.
That's what I was
What
going
have
to
you?
jump into. Hold on a second, Kim, because I wanted to. Your first platoon sergeant, did he uh, did he make a bigger impression, or was it your drill sergeant that made a bigger impression?
Wow, that's a really difficult question. It's hard. I would say that both of them had a pivotal part in my life. Quick scenario from, if you've ever, I don't know if you'd ever been to Fort Irwin out there and outside of
Oh yeah.
Barstow, California, where they teach you to fight in the desert. But my very first platoon sergeant, we were out there for a 3 week uh, uh, mock,
Mm-hmm.
and I fell asleep on guard duty,
Ooh.
and I could still remember. I was like, I don't even think I had the mosquito wings on my lapels yet, but I could still remember that conversation and his disappointment. It felt really close to like if I'd ever disappointed my father. Like he was very tough, but it was almost like his approval and his I didn't want to disappoint him that made me, I think, such a probably a good kid and then ultimately a good follower. But that experience of that first platoon sergeant out there at Fort Irwin still sticks in my mind, and I never, and I mean never, fell asleep again. And that came into play in Saudi Arabia and then ultimately in Iraq.
What I was curious about is, and actually, Dad, you set me up for just to build onto that question because all the examples you're giving are to, as a civilian here, very military examples. What have you seen as far as like application of that, of what that looks like in the business world or just, in civilian life?
Probably the biggest things to me are within just the teamwork elements that really crystallized for me in the service. I mean, I'd gotten that a little bit in high school playing ball before I went in the service, but when I got in the service, it really crystallized for me how powerful the teamwork element was going to be. And that's what I took, Cam, into my civilian life after the service. And it started for me really early on job sites. I was managing new home construction, and I had all of these folks that showed up on the job sites to get the job done. And it was my job to not only put them in a place where they could succeed, but then to get them to work together. And that ended up becoming one of my signature strengths as a really early leader, and then something that ended up manifesting even further into my career. And the power to work with individual people and inspire them to do something different or something better, and then to be able to work with teams is something that I saw play out in the service. Mm-hmm. And it wasn't as prevalent in, I'll call it the real world when I got back, right? So it was a fertile ground for me to explore and push. And I was, looking back on it, I would say that I was successful in that part of the endeavor.
We talked about with Green Berets qualification course, you get the leadership aspects, the team building aspects there. Jeff, in your time, post-military, how did you find ways to build that same team energy, that same leadership capacity without taking your team and running them off to the mountains for, 3 weeks at a time?
Right. So I personally believe that leadership is a people game. I mean, really, to me, at the end of the day, business is a people game. And when I say people, I mean playing small and playing long, right? So I'm a guy who believes in writing handwritten notes and bringing people together. The old classic, you really want to coach in private, you want to praise in public. Again, it's all of these small and fundamental things that, if played out over time, and again, I believe if you focus on individuals, I mean, the individuals make up the team. And when you focus on the individuals and you break it down to the very most basic fundamentals, and the people that are in your charge believe that you not only care about them, but you equally care about the mission, that's where the secret sauce is. So just caring about somebody individually. And mm-hmm. I mean, to be honest, sometimes you have to care enough about somebody to work them off of your team if it's not a right fit. Right. And even though that's a small part, it's a powerful part of the leadership equation. But I believe personally, it's the individual. So it's the caring for somebody individually. And I mean, I'll give you a great example. When people left my organization voluntarily, because I was in a very cyclical, most industries can be fairly cyclical, but mine certainly was. Mm-hmm. And people would leave the organization, and I'd say, hey, listen, I understand that you see greener pastures and you want to go, exercise your skills at a different organization where you have this opportunity. I want you to know that that's fine. And I'm still here for you in the future, because I care as much about you as I do about the mission. And I think that's one of the things that made me a different type of leader.
So how did you get into the home building business? I mean, we got to touch on it because you mentioned it was cyclical, and it is somewhat. So how did that happen in 30 years of it?
Yeah, I basically grew up in it. So that father that I was talking to you about, the core values guy, when we moved here from California, he became a house painter. And so I've essentially been on job sites since I was about 7 or 8 years old, way before I ever should have. So I grew up in his shadow. I became a house painter. I painted all the way through, all my summers. I enlisted in the service before I'd even graduated high school. So basically, when I got out of the service, I came right back here. I ended up in the same painting job that I'd had before I went in the service. And while I was on a job painting a new home community, they were looking for an assistant superintendent. And that is actually how my career started. And they told me what the job paid, and I'd have done just about anything to And that's how and I am a bit of a unicorn, where of the entire 30 years, I worked for the same organization. And so that was a little bit unique, but it also led to my leadership ability. I had team members when I retired here in in March, that had been at the organization as I literally worked with one person that was on my customer care team for over 30 years.
Wow. Yeah, that's
pretty cool.
That's a testament to the organization as a whole. One thing I've always seen that some people struggle with is, but both military and business, truthfully, is promoting from within. And one day you're the rifleman, next day you're the squad leader, and one day you're the painter, next day you're the assistant superintendent. What's some lessons learned in that transition? Because you go from being a peer to being a supervisor of the exact same people you were a peer for yesterday.
Right. And another fun story there. So just as soon as I'd gotten out of the service, I was only an assistant superintendent for maybe a year and a half at the most, and I got promoted to be a super. Mm-hmm. And I was still this, pimply faced kid right out of, I was 20 years old when I was coming back from Iraq. Mm-hmm. So I was 22 years old, had just been promoted from an assistant to a superintendent. And the lessons learned is, don't be afraid to say yes. If you're, and I'm sure you guys are in the same camp I am. I know you are, because the whole podcast is about, lifelong learning. And that is my holy grail. That's not only how I figured it out early, but I did make a handful of mistakes in the middle part of my life, in my late 30s, that I had to overcome. And it was really through personal development. So I think the two biggest things, Otis, would be, number one is be willing to say yes to an opportunity, even if you don't feel or think that you have the skill set, because at least if you have this proclivity, I believe you will learn your way through that, and you will learn your way there. And I think I'm probably the poster child for just that. And then the second part is the personal development aspect, which, leads directly to that first answer, which is, if you're willing to put in the work and read the books and study the people that have been there before you, and I think another thing about just leadership and growth in general, and this I think is oftentimes hard for folks that have come out of the service, is the humble factor, right? To be a humble leader and humble yourself to be able to open yourself up to learn and grow. And often that can even be from folks that are younger than you or brighter than you. And, I've certainly worked with most of the people in my career that have been a lot brighter than me. And I was just fortunate enough to say yes and keep plowing forward.
How did you build that confidence? Because you're talking about, becoming the super at 22, leading a bunch of guys who are probably much older than you. That imposter syndrome could start up there. And it sounds like you, at the very least, have a very good hold on it. Was that something that you dealt with, or did you already have a pretty good grip on your confidence and, that personal development that you're talking about?
It's developed over time, Cam. So think about going back to the football field when I was in high school. I'd mentioned I was a little bit of this, kind of not the most confident guy in the world, but getting out there and this is, when I say ball, I mean football. And when you start having physical contact with somebody, like, it changes, to me, just in your mindset about how life can work, right? And so it started there. And then the military, like I said, when I was alluding to that teamwork element before, and I've written speeches about this in the past, like from my military experience, when you go into situations where you're not 100% confident in yourself, the most classic example I give is driving that armored personnel carrier through the border of Saudi Arabia and Iraq on invasion day. And I say, like, that is the most scared that I've ever been in my entire life. And do you know what I was scared about? Yes, of my own mortality, but I didn't want to fail. I didn't want to fail my team. I didn't want to fail my country. I didn't want to fail the mission. And so the way that I said it in that speech was, even though I had these reservations about my own ability, I had to play bigger than what I thought my own ability was, because the moment, the mission called for it, right? So I had to play bigger. And that's essentially how I think it works.
How do you translate that into non-military, non-go to war? Not crossing the LD into being into the bad guys shooting at you, into, because fear of failure is a huge limiting belief, right? It is that thing of keeps people from trying. I was just on the call with a client just a minute ago, and he's like, I don't know if that's really what I want to try, and then, which is a fear of failure. How do you help clients?
Right.
And even before that, when you had guys on your team, you'd say, hey, I'm promoting you to be assistant supervisor. Oh, no, boss. Not me. Should be Bob. Bob would be much better at it, right? It's that sort of thing. How do you help folks get over that?
I think part of it is instilling not only the vision. So that's what a good leader does, is a leader paints the picture of what something better looks like, or the mission accomplished, things of that nature. So part of it is the vision for the future. And then the other part, sometimes I've never really thought about it like this, Otis, but it's instilling your level of confidence in them, right? And not that they might be able to be ready to do it exactly right now, because that's probably not the case, right? Oftentimes it's, fail forward faster, right? So I would say implementing a little bit of your own confidence into them. I mean, I've got a great example of somebody that was on my team that had moved from construction, had been with me for 5 or 8 years, and he moved into a purchasing role because he wanted to try some other things. But I had an opportunity in the product development or the architecture department. And I said to this person, I'm like, this is your job. Like, I don't know why the universe has came together in this scenario right now, but this position that opened up is yours. And he's like, oh, but you don't understand. I've only been in purchasing he'd probably been there 5 months. It probably felt like 5 minutes to him. Yeah. And I said, well, I understand that this doesn't feel good to you, but trust me, I know your skill set. I know what you're made to do, and you should say yes to this position. He said yes to it. That was over 10 years ago. Crushed it.
Mm-hmm. I think that's such an important piece of, like, those nerves are always going to be there, and just being able to overcome those nerves each different time. Because I think a lot of times when we talk about overcoming nerves, building confidence, I think we tend to portray it in a way where it's like, okay, hey, I did that once. Now I'm all set. Like, now my confidence is there. I am all set. But no, it's going to keep coming like that. Like, and I'm sure I've told this story probably. We're at 260 some episodes. I'm sure I've told it a bunch. But of a high school rugby state championship, Dad, you were the coach that year, and you talked about everyone had to go take a piss right before the game. And it's like, if you don't, it's because you don't care. You should be nervous right now because you care about what you're about to go do. It's a big day. It's a state championship. You should have those nerves. And it's about, overcoming those nerves and continuing to build past it. I could think of a whole list of situations since that state championship rugby game where I've had that same feeling where I'm like, oh my gosh, I am freaking out right here. And it's just the same. No, I am here for a reason. I've been building this for a long time. And you just have to be comfortable with that feeling. Jeff, do you think, or how have you, give us like a couple like specific tactics that you've used to help people on your team to understand that and to keep moving forward?
I'll give you maybe a recent client example. And so I've got a CEO of a company, and he basically hired me because we'd worked together in our careers, and he saw my leadership style, and he wanted to implement in his own. So he's the CEO of the company, and yet he's struggling to find his leadership voice. And so I used a tool. I consider all the things that I do with my clients tools, because I like to give people like practical things that they could really use in their life and their business at the end of our conversation, or the next week, or before our next conversation. And the tool that I gave him was, I'm excited, right? So this speaks to, Cam, like that feeling that you get when you're getting ready to get up on stage, for example. Even if it were, given the toast, you're the best man, you're given the toast at the wedding, or you're the CEO and you either have to get up in front of 12 of your leadership team or 50 people in your organization when you're doing State of the Union for your organization. And those feelings that we feel in our gut, you can name it anything you want. A lot of people call it anxiety, for example, right? But if you name that feeling excitement, and then you go into that situation saying, these are just the feelings, right? These are like you were talking about before that rugby match. Like, these are the feelings that you should be feeling. Because if you were just feeling like, oh hum about it, then there's what enthusiasm, what excitement is there for the match, or for this where you're given, I mean, as a leader, how many times, that's a great leadership principle. How many times do you actually get 5 minutes with any one team member, right? And if you're having a bad day and you say something to that team member, all they're going to remember was that 5 minutes that you had with them, where you were, not having a great day. Mm-hmm. And so I'm excited is one of the most powerful tools that I've ever used myself as a Toastmaster speaker, and one of the ones that I use with my clients all the time.
That's a great one, and I really love that. Just excuse me. It reminds me of our buddy Scotty Mann talking about prepping for giving a talk and going into the room that you're giving the talk and putting your hands on the wall and feeling the texture of the wall, because we're so textile, as humans, and just doing something like that. And I started doing that. So I'm going to start saying I'm excited too, which I think I usually am. I don't generally get too nervous about those sort of things anymore. When you're moving,
I just want to add one thing there before you ask, because what we're talking about is like, the interpretation of those feelings. It's just the Viktor Frankl approach, that there's this stimulus. You have something going on, your heart is beating fast, and it's literally just a choice of how are you going to interpret your heart beating fast, and that could be any number of things. We're talking about now, it's anxiety, it's excitement. But it's really just those little things and being in tune with that. We've talked about the same anxiety spirals. If you get frustrated, you go forward like this and it cuts off your breathing, like all those little things. All those little cues can go either direction at any point. And so I just want to make sure we made that point. Going back to like the Viktor Frankl of that gap between stimulus and response. Just determine what your response is going to be, because you can choose a positive one probably 99% of the time.
Yeah. Right. Do you have a story of where you learned that the hard way? Where you got up there in front of the team and did the today we're going to
Right. Well, I'll have a story of what was my crucible moment for that. And so I became a director in 2007. And I found myself in the room with about 12 project managers, supers, and I was just not comfortable in my own skin and in the room and in that position. I mean, 6 months before that, I'd been one of the guys sitting around the table. This probably speaks really similar to that other question that you had, Otis, but 6 months before, I was one of the guys in the room sitting around the table, and I was the one saying, like, don't call me, don't make eye contact with the person who's running the meeting.
I'm taking notes.
On me, and
I'm taking notes. Don't
thing.
Look at me.
Right. And so I found myself at the head of the table and running the meetings. And the crucible moment for me, I struggled, and I got through a couple of those first meetings. But Otis, this was exactly what I was speaking about before. I knew I wanted something different for me personally, and I wanted something different for my team. So what did I need to do? I need to find a tool. And so the first time that I ever joined Toastmasters was 2008. And in the first, I think, 2.5 years that I was in it, I received my competent communicator and my competent leader designations. And that first round in Toastmasters got me comfortable in front of the group. And then I laid off of Toastmasters from 2010. I just started back again I just started back again about 2019. But as a part of this next part of my leadership and my career, I didn't want to just be comfortable in front of a group. I wanted to go up there and be confident in my message. And so that is the example that when I was doing those leadership team meetings and I wasn't as effective as I thought I needed to be as a leader. And again, I guess as I said here and say it again, I guess that's why I'm back in Toastmasters right now, is because I want to be a more effective speaker and I want to be able to get these points over in a way that make it palatable for people and they can understand, that you can essentially, and I believe this to my core, that there's literally nothing that you can't achieve if you write it down and you decide you're going to have it, and then you're not afraid to go to work and work hard. There's nothing with a capital N that you can't make happen.
Is there anything, because it sounds like you're, probably on the tail end of it, but still going through that growth that you're talking about. Is there anything that from your experience going through that you could identify for other people as far as getting past comfortable, which is a great way to put it, because that's what most of us look for. It's just being comfortable up there, but that's not what it should be. You should be confident in your message. What are some things you've noticed in that growth from one to the other?
Well, I'll tell you, it sure makes the next speech or the next event that you're going to have much more fun, because I can remember preparing, Camden, for the very first speeches, or it's never really worked that way for me. The 10 years in between going to Toastmasters, like I was probably nervous before every speech the first time I was doing it. And now it's changed to where I'm excited. Like I can't wait for the presentation, or even just to speak extemporaneously. If somebody said, Jeff, would you want to come up here on stage and riff on 5 minutes on whatever's on your heart? It can be, leadership or people development or any of these things, personal development. They'd probably have to have a hook to pull me off the stage, right? Because I love the opportunity now. And how, if you're sitting there today and you're having if you're having these feelings, like you're anxious, you don't want to have the presentation, you can't wait for it to be over, that kind of thing, there is a place in life that you can get to through study and practice where you're not only not dreading that, you're looking forward to that type of experience. And that's what I'm talking about. And right now we're just talking about public speaking and confidence versus anxiety, but there's almost, you could apply this at any part of your life, being a confident father, having a conversation with your young child, being a leader and having that conversation with not only just a direct report, but imagine having the confidence to be able to communicate that effectively to a peer. That can be powerful.
Yeah, that is. And that's, it all goes back to communication, right? And that's one of your jobs as a leader. And what I'd love to dive into is this transition you made. 30 years, same business, like one of probably 10 million people in the U.S. that have managed to do that in this day and age. 40 years ago, that was very common, but nowadays it's like, no, man, I've worked for 15 different companies in 30 years or whatever, right?
Right.
What made you decide, all right, because it's been your life, all right, I'm done with that, I want to move over and do this?
It was really a combination of two things, Otis. It was a little bit weary of running into the corporate fire, right? So it doesn't matter whether you work for an organization that's private equity or you work for corporations like I did for the second half of my career. There's always that element as you're only as good as your last ball game. And that's legitimate. That's how life works. But playing at the level that I was playing as a senior level executive, there was a certain amount of stress that came along with that. And so basically, I don't know, it was 3 years ago, I made a 5-year plan to be where I was in March. So if that says that I'm pretty good at getting what I want, then that's probably a good statement. But it was a little bit of that weary of running into the corporate fire. I had just passed through age 50, and so I was coming at a different place in my life where I was doing this evaluation. And this is a little bit of an aside, but I want to live to 103 at least. And so I feel like I have half of my life left. And I look forward to my future, and I said, how can I have the similar or a even bigger impact than I've been able to have in my corporate life with people? Really, that's my holy grail, is operational excellence, or helping people succeed. And how can I have that same type of influence, let's call it, but on my own terms, where I could have a little bit more autonomy in my lifestyle, travel, just more autonomy in my life. So it was really those two things that kind of coincided for me, Otis, that really made me made me make the decision for something different in my life. And so now I get to do that with CEOs and founder types and senior level executives, and it's the same folks that I've been working with my whole career. I get a little bit more autonomy in how I do it.
How much parallels how many parallels, sorry, do you see between your transition out of the military and then this recent transition, and to that autonomy that you're talking about? Was there a lot of similarities there?
Actually, I've never really considered that, Camden, but there are parallels, right? Because the military is very strict. I look back, and I couldn't have been like a 20-year guy, because I love living in my state, and I didn't want to. I mean, even though I guess my travel abroad was, I didn't get the best version of travel abroad and see the world. Yeah. So it was Fort Irwin and Saudi Arabia and Iraq. Those were my travel abroad opportunities. So I think it's really similar, Cam. I loved what's the old saying, is discipline good or is discipline bad? Mm-hmm. And it could be both, right? And I love the discipline that I learned in the service. And there was also an element of it that I knew that I didn't want the rest of my life. It's kind of crazy now that I think about it. Like I still wear my hair short. Like I have if my hair starts touching my ears even today at 53, I feel like the drill sergeant's going to be sneaking up behind me here and having some words, right? So I think it is. I've never really thought about it that way, but I'd say there are a lot of similarities with maybe that autonomy that I'm seeking is the one word answer to what your question is. Yeah.
I love the 5-year plan. I do that with all my clients and have them work towards that. Where did that vision, or the idea of grabbing on, saying 5 years and not 2 years or 10 years, and just as a tool, kind of walk us through that personal process.
Right. I actually have an entire goal setting process that I use with my clients that I call the 1-page plan. And so I put everything that's happening on my life onto a single piece of paper. And we used to do that in the business unit that I worked. I did that for over a decade in business. And that's why I started applying it in my own life. And the goals that are on the 1-page plan go out just a year. But I'm a big fan. The word that I use, I have another process that I use, Otis, called my day of Zen. So once a month, I take an entire day off. I call the tagline for my day of Zen, checking out so you can check in. So basically, what are you checking out on? Everything else in life. Like my business, my family, anybody that's close to me knows that they're not going to get me on this day, my day of Zen. Mm-hmm. And I do a wholesale reflection of the month before. Like I did a video here just couple of weeks ago when I did my day of Zen at the end of May, I had 32 things on my list that went great in May, and I had 6 things that I wanted to work on differently or better in June, and I'm working on crushing June right now. So even though my one-page plan goes out to just a year, I use the word that I use, Otis, is speculation. So I like to go out into the future. I think 5 years is the best time frame that I've found. And I've already heard Camden swear a little bit. So
go ahead.
Well, he said piss. So I think you can put semi-scary shit on your 5-year list, right? So in a year, you can contemplate what you can get done in a year. I think it's Tony Robbins says something like, people way overestimate what they can do in a year, and they way underestimate what they can do in like that 5 to 10 year range. And so that's why I love 5 years, is because you can put things on a list that are, as I said, semi-scary, and you can get to work on it. If you have a great yearly plan, that's how I got my 5-year plan done in 3 years, because I looked out ahead of my vision and I said, hey, what do I need to do? Do I need to, for me, I wanted to like pay my house off and pay like everything that I could do, to put myself in a position where I was making this transition. I mean, it's the first time in my life that I've been an entrepreneur. And so I put that plan in place, including the financial statistics around where I wanted to be, because I'm going to live to 103 at least.
Sorry, I had a couple different questions swirling around. One, talking about like the day of Zen, and the 2 things that pop up immediately for me, so I'm guessing that's what a lot of people would go through when you try to coach your clients into that, is, the fear of falling behind, of, the workload. You got to, like we talked about the whirlwind, Dad, you got to get out, got to keep going with the whirlwind to keep things moving. Otherwise things fall apart. And then there's also that fear of, I guess you would put it as like others' judgment, in the case of like you're taking this time away and somebody from your business calls and it's like, wow, why didn't Jeff answer me today? This is so crucial and all that kind of stuff. Could you talk us through of why those assumptions and fears are wrong? Because I'm sure they are.
Well, let me start with the latter one. And so I say this out loud, and I make no apology. Like, I don't care what anybody thinks. Because if I can't take care of me, who am I ever going to be able to take care outside of me? My spouse, my children, my grandkids, my coaching clients. If I'm not well personally, physically, mentally, spiritually, how will I be able to do anything for anybody else? And to tell you, just to be quite frank, Camden, like that's what people are lost with today, is they care more about what other people think about what they're doing than they do about their own personal mission. And so just to be a little bit blunt about it, that's how it works. And so, and just like anything else in leadership, one of the fun things I like to do as a leader, I just did this last week with a group of superintendents from this masonry company that I'm working with. And we sat down for a breakfast and we rolled out what the training that we were going to be doing together over the next 4 months. And I said, we're going to play a little game here at the start, which is going to be at the end of this meeting, we're all going to pick our phones up and we're going to see how many phone calls we missed, right? And they're like, well, if we missed more, or if we missed less, how do we win? I said, well, I'm not going to tell you what the rules of the game are right now. We're just going to take account, right? Because one of the things that we're going to be getting together and talking about with this group is time management and organization. And one of the things that I'm getting ready to tell you now, which is the same as my day of Zen, which is I train people how to treat me. And I mean my kids and my spouse, just anybody else in the world. I train people how to treat me, which is, so I know, and that doesn't mean, that might sound a little bit harsh, but like I'm a big fan of, if the camera was a little wider, you'd see John Wooden on the wall behind me here, right? So one of the things that I'm pretty famous for saying, and I said this to these superintendents before they got at breakfast that started at 7, which I said, I'm on John Wooden time, which means my idea of on time is 5 minutes early, right? So if you're not sitting around this table at 6:55, you are officially late, right? And so that's training someone proactively. If they know that you are critical with your time frames and what you expect of people, like people will mostly do whatever you ask of them, right? But most people just don't ask. And so I think it comes down to, maybe that word training is a little harsh, Cam, but that speaks to, that's at least what I was feeling on my heart when you asked the question.
No, I think that makes a lot of sense, because it's like, yeah, I mean, we could probably play some thesaurus games with it a little bit, but it's teaching people what you want for them. It's like, if any sort of therapy, couples therapy, all those type of things, almost every type of those things is just explain what you want from somebody so that they can understand it. And if you explain what you want from somebody, they're probably going to do it, unless they're a jerk and then you don't want them in your life anyway, right? But if you never explain it, too often that's what we do, is we don't explain, and we expect people to read our minds and that kind of stuff. So I love that. I was curious, when you start talking about that, have you, I'm trying to broaden it out a little bit, because I think the time example is an easier one. How have you done that in a way to teach people more high level type stuff? Like, I'm thinking of how to approach leadership inside the organization, or anything like that, because timeliness, that's a smaller one. Trying to take that up another level of trying to teach somebody how to come bring problems to you, to come, bring solutions rather, and those type of things. How do you do that?
Yeah, I'll just go with that example that you just used. So I don't teach people to bring their problems to me. I teach people to do just the opposite. So I used to have a little phrase that I used with my direct reports on my team, which is like, I don't like, they'd sit down and start telling me the problem or whatever. And I'd say, hey, listen, I don't need to know all of what's going on right now. Like, you're in a position of leadership. I've put you there. What I want you to do is, I want you to tell me how the story ends. Right. And then I would say, and I like happy endings. Right. So, and again, this is one of those, what I would call a tool. And Cam, I would call this like a tool of empowerment, right? Because that's what a lot of folks are looking for as young leaders, or as people that have been put in charge of projects, is to understand where they're making their way forward. And you use the classic example, which is, hey, and that doesn't mean that I wasn't available to my team, but if they brought me a problem, I would want what you just said was, well, why don't you tell me the solutions that you're thinking about, and I'll tell you. And oftentimes I wouldn't even tell them. I mean, they would tell me the problem. They would tell me what they were thinking about as a solution. And I would say, like, yeah, go with it. Like, if we're not breaking some stuff, if we're not failing, how do we know, what forward looks like? If every decision you make is a safe decision, that's probably a pretty vanilla scenario.
Oh yeah, because that eliminates all the risk and all the challenges and all the pain that you learn from. So yeah,
Right.
that's so true. I want to jump back to the philosophy of your business, success harmony. How did you do a mind shift? Maybe there wasn't one. Maybe it's always been this way. But some people see it as or and not and. And you're
Right.
very much an and guy, just in that, what you were just talking about, a lot of ands in there.
Right.
So how do you show that it's not an or statement, it's an and statement to your clients?
So the whole harmony philosophy for me, Otis, was, and again, I'm kind of famous for goofing on work-life balance, just because if I conjure up that image of the old, like, apothecary scale, like, how are you supposed to put, like, work in one bowl and everything else in life in another, and somehow those are supposed to balance out, right? So I just call work-life balance the wrong measurement. And so that's why I came up with this philosophy of harmony. And unfortunately, Otis, I figured this out by smashing my face in the dirt a lot. And it was in my middle 30s. And I just gave a Toastmaster speech about this a couple of weeks ago, where even though I was really successful in business early on, we were talking about that, assistant to super, the term that I use in the speech was, I sold out as a father. Like, I didn't take more than maybe a day or two off when my older kids were born. And I'm not proud of that. And I got to be, over 100 pounds overweight. And I wasn't managing money well. And so I ended up being bankrupt. And I had these things that I'm not proud of that were going on in my life. And I had to basically pull myself up by my bootstraps and say, something's got to be different. And that was that second round of personal development for me, where I really just had to, I hate to use the term, but get real with myself on who I was being, right? Because it wasn't positive and it wasn't productive. And so I really got to the point where I was a busy executive and busy father, kids, grandkids. I wanted to travel and I was doing all these things in my life. And I was just, I like to use the analogy of the plate spinning, right? I was spinning all these plates and I was becoming like ever more efficient at plate spinning, but then I was still just spinning plates, right? Like if I think the old example is, if you're a hamster running on the wheel, like, or a rat, like, well, you're still a rat. Like nobody wants to be a rat. So like, how do I figure this out? And so that's really where the whole day of Zen, that's really the first thing that I implemented that changed all of this for me. And I had to break all of these. I now refer to them, Otis, as roles. So I break down these roles, whether it's coach today or husband or father, or any of these roles. And they're always changing, because that's the thing about life is just as soon as you have this great, 1-page plan for life and you're all proud of it, you're going to run out there into the world. And then it's going to do a couple of things. It's either going to start throwing left hooks at you, or just straight out gut punches, right? Think about a global pandemic, right? So life is always changing. And then I just heard this fun quote the other day. It said, I think this was Connie Podesta, life would be easy if it wasn't for these other people. Right? And so you have all these other people in your life, your spouse and your coworkers and your team, and everybody's, trying to live out their own little lives just like we all are individually. And that's where the harmony came from for me. It was like, instead of doing the plate spinning, how could I manage these roles in my life effectively where they were in harmony? And to me, that felt like something that was more, but certainly just, it sounded better, right? Think about a great song with barbershop quartet is what would be in the dictionary, but that's probably lost on most people these days. But if you think about the harmony that's in any beautiful song that it moves people emotionally, right? I love to think about like a beautiful Whitney Houston song, right? When she's belting out, those powerful lyrics, like that moves you emotionally. And that's what I'm trying to create in my life now, instead of that plate spinning, is that the beautiful sound of what life looks like.
I love that. I know with Tribe and Purpose, we talk about, there's no such thing as work-life balance. It's all life. It's just life management. How are you going to manage all of those different life categories? But talking about personal development, one more question before we wrap that came up is, you talked about your personal development and this, what I think is a very common way of people kind of stumbling into it, which is this like cyclical nature of, it's like, okay, hey, I developed the hell out of myself these last 3 years. Now I got the job and then everything's great. And then you go, oh shoot, it's not great. I got to develop again. Looking back on it now and, talking about with your clients, those type of things, do you think it's something that needs to be cyclical? Do you think it needs to like slowly inch forward all the time? Shorter cycles? What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I don't know about need. I think need is like, you should determine that for yourself. Mm-hmm. But I can tell you, based on my own evaluation, I actually have a core value now that's on my 1-page plan, just about being a lifetime learner. That's why even the description of your podcast resonated so much for me. And so I personally believe it should be for me. And what I really encourage my clients to be is a lifetime learner, because this is the classic analogy of climbing the mountain. Because just as soon as you get to the top of the current mountain that you're climbing and you look around, there's probably a taller mountain, right? Or there's probably a set of circumstances, take today's day and age, like, well, what is AI going to mean in all of our lives going forward? It's going to mean something. It could probably be as good or as bad as you either let it be, or you allow it to be, or if you want to go out there on the front edge right now and start studying how it's going to play out in our lives and be a part of that, then you're an active participant in your own life.
I'm snickering to myself because I just realized I don't think there's been a show since February that we haven't talked about AI either directly or indirectly, and you kept the streak running by bringing it out. So.
I should have pumped the brakes right there. I was thinking like, oh, use something other than that.
It's kind of funny. It almost becomes like that, like cliche example now, but it is this huge thing. So you got to talk about it.
It's relevant, right? It's relevant for where we are in the moment. And it's the classic example of, it can be the boogeyman if you want to let it be, or you can go out there and study. And that's just a real practical example, Cam, of what I'm doing right now is trying to educate. And that's what I had to do 15 years ago after I was broke, was like educate myself on how finance worked, the basics of, income, budgets and income in and that kind of thing, all the way up to teaching myself how stocks worked and just becoming more proficient at all of that, because it needed to be a bigger part and a better part of my life.
Love it.
That's awesome. And when I start reviewing my notes from everything we talked about, I go back to something I hadn't thought about it this way, because I've never phrased it this way. I think is more what it is, but I've always done it. I just never thought about it in an intentional way, and that was instilling my confidence in the individual when I wanted to put them in charge. I would do that, but I never really thought about, why am I doing that? I'm doing that because if they know that I'm confident in their ability to perform, then they're more likely to be able to perform and do what I ask them to do, as in taking responsibility in that position and in that job. So I appreciate the nice, concise wording of that. Camden, how about you? What'd you learn?
Yeah, for me, Jeff, you said this early on of, playing small and long when we're talking about leadership. And we've talked about on the show a bunch of like bouncing between like the micro view and the macro view, and it's how it's so important to have those different perspectives. We talk about playing the long game, but playing small along the way of those human interactions is such an important piece to keep in mind, because you're not going to make it to the long game if you're not focusing also on those human interactions along the way. So that was it for me today.
Jeff, how about you? What'd you learn?
This was kind of a small example, but I really appreciated when you shared that story about your friend Scotty going in to do the public speaking, and he was doing like I would say that as like tactile sensations, like going into the room and really exploring it from a physical touch standpoint. I've never really thought about doing that as a speaker, but as I've reflected on that, even as we've been chatting, I thought like, wow, that could be very powerful. So I made note of that to give that a try myself.
Oh yeah. I did it very intentionally in the last keynote I gave, and it was much different. It felt much different stepping up there on stage in front of everybody, instead of the usual just kind of, okay, what's it look like? How many people? Sort of thing. So yeah, it's an interesting thing. And so, Jeff, how can folks find you, get in touch with you, learn more about what's going on?
Absolutely. So the best place to find me would be on my website. And so I'll just spell it out. So it is my first and last name. So it's Jeff, Jeff, Eschliman, Eschliman. And a handful of things that you can do when you land on my website. You could take a quick assessment to find out how much harmony you have in your life. I've got a little video series on my website that breaks down those, at least the two that we talked about today, which is the 1-page plan and the Day of Zen. And then I've got a third piece, maybe a conversation for us later. The third piece is the Carpe Diem. So Carpe Diem, Latin for seize the day, right? And so between those three, those are the powerful elements for me. And then again, you can just hit me up directly on my website for a chat. Again, that's Jeff, Jeff, Eschliman, Eschliman.com. That's a great place to find me.
Awesome. Well, hey, Jeff, man, this has been great, and always love diving into these leadership conversations. And one of the things I'll say a bonus learning for me today is how similar, but not exactly the same, we're saying things. So it's a great way to hear, great way to learn to hear it from a different perspective and talk about things that way. So thank you very much for sharing that with us today.
Absolutely. I've enjoyed being on the show.
Camden, run us out.
All right. Thank you all for listening to the Cam Otis Show, and a special thanks to our guest, Jeff Eschliman, for joining us today. If you enjoyed today's episode, make sure to pass along to someone else so they can enjoy it too. Make sure to follow the Cam Otis Show on Facebook and Instagram, and you can watch full videos of the show on our YouTube page. And while you're there, hit that subscribe button too. As always, the full archive of our episodes is available at www.camandotisshow.com. Thanks again. We'll see y'all next time.